Today, we're going to talk about something that's affecting all of us, the way we know what's true. We're seeing our core institutions, the very things that are supposed to ground us in reality, start to break down. And now AI is supercharging that breakdown, making us incredibly vulnerable to disinformation. To really get what's at stake, we're going to start with a recent crisis in Europe, and it's a really stark warning.
So just imagine waking up to a headline like this. In 2025, an entire national election in Romania was thrown into total chaos. But not by tanks in the streets. No, this was different. It was brought on by a flood of propaganda so intense, it pushed a modern democracy right to the edge of the cliff.
So here's what happened. Out of nowhere, a fringe candidate, a guy named Călin Georgescu, just surged to this shocking lead. And what was fueling it? A fire hose of disinformation, mostly on TikTok. Things got so bad that the country's highest court had to take this extraordinary, almost unthinkable step. They annulled the entire election. Now, a rerun eventually ended the immediate crisis, but the damage was done. Public trust was just shattered. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by diagnosing what we'll call society's weakened immune system. Then we'll look at what happens when truth itself begins to crumble. After that, we'll see how AI acts as a massive force multiplier in all of this. And finally, we'll ask the big question. Is there any way to escape this information chaos? You see, that crisis in Romania, it wasn't just some random event. It was a symptom of something much deeper. The best way to think about it is like this. Disinformation is a virus, and it's attacking a body that already has a compromised immune system. The real problem isn't just the virus. It's those pre-existing weaknesses that let it take hold.
And there's actually a name for this condition. It's called epistemic vulnerability. Now that sounds a little academic, I know, but the idea is actually really simple. It's when our collective ability as a society to tell what's real from what's fake gets seriously damaged. And that happens when the institutions we've always relied on schools, the media, even the government, start to crumble.
This vulnerability, this weakness, it really rests on three shaky pillars. First, you've got a failing education system. Then, a media landscape that's been captured, destroying public trust. And finally, eroding governance that just fuels cynicism and anti-establishment anger. Let's take a quick look at each one. So check out this number, 49%. Now, this isn't just about kids being bad at math. It tells a much, much bigger story. When almost half of your young people lack basic functional literacy, you have a serious crisis on your hands. It means an entire generation might not have the essential skills they need to analyze complex information or, spot a manipulated argument when they see one. And if you're asking, well, why is this happening? This chart is a huge clue. Romania spends the lowest share of its GDP on education in the entire European Union. We're talking 2.9% versus the EU average of 5%. This kind of chronic underinvestment literally starves the public of what you might call epistemic resilience, and that just creates a vicious cycle. Okay, next up, the media. When major news outlets are basically controlled by oligarchs with their own agendas, public trust just evaporates. It gets so bad that journalists become the second least trusted professionals in the country, right after politicians. In that kind of environment, even fact checks get dismissed as just another part of the mainstream conspiracy, and it leads to this deeply cynical mindset where people just assume everyone is lying. And this collapse in trust leads to this really fascinating, kind of weird paradox. People are flocking to social media for their news. Over a third of Romanians are getting it from places like Facebook and TikTok. But here's the kicker. Over 65% of them say they don't trust the information they find there. So they're actively consuming news that they're already primed to believe is fake. And that brings us to the final pillar, governance. After years and years of corruption and bureaucracy, public faith in the state has been completely hollowed out. And the research on this is crystal clear. Low trust in government directly, systematically correlates with a greater belief in conspiracy theories. It makes perfect sense, right? When the system feels rigged, narratives about secret plots and hidden agendas start to sound a lot more plausible. This whole idea, this collapse of a shared reality, it isn't some brand new 21st century problem. In fact, for decades, some absolutely brilliant thinkers were warning us about what happens when the very foundations of truth start to crack. And honestly, their ideas feel more relevant right now than ever before. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, for example, she argued that the real goal of total propaganda isn't to make you believe a lie. It's much scarier than that. The goal is to completely exhaust you, to flood you with so much nonsense that you lose your grip on reality itself. And the result is this really dangerous paradox. You believe nothing is true, which, weirdly, makes you capable of believing anything. Then you have Michel Foucault's concept of regimes of truth. He argued that truth isn't just something that's out there waiting to be discovered, it's actually produced by institutions like schools, media, science. So when those traditional gatekeepers start to erode, their monopoly on what counts as truth shatters. And what you get are all these competing truths that emerge to take their place. The scientific consensus on one side and a conspiracy form on the other, both claiming to be the real truth. And finally, Umberto Eco's analysis of what he called fascism gives us this terrifyingly accurate blueprint for modern propaganda. He pointed out its obsession with a plot, some grand conspiracy, its rejection of nuance and complexity, and its reliance on emotionally charged symbols and memes instead of, actual logic. Sound familiar? It is the exact playbook disinformation uses today to bypass our critical thinking. Okay, so we've established this picture, a society with a weakened immune system, meaning a full-blown crisis of truth. Now, let's add the accelerant. Let's add AI. It's the opportunistic infection that takes all these pre-existing conditions and makes them exponentially more dangerous. I mean, just look at this massive shift. Propaganda used to be incredibly expensive, it was slow, and you pretty much needed a state-run agency to pull it off. But now, with AI, it's cheap, it's instant, and it can be launched by literally anyone with a laptop. A state-level propaganda machine can now effectively be run from a basement. So how exactly does AI supercharge all this chaos? Well, first, you've got algorithmic amplification, where social media platforms themselves funnel users down rabbit holes toward more and more extreme content. Then you have deepfakes, which completely shatter our trust in video and audio evidence. And finally, you have automated propaganda itself, armies of AI sock puppets that can groom individuals, slowly persuading them to accept radical beliefs. The consequence of this is just profound. The old saying, seeing is believing, that's over. Seeing and hearing are no longer believing. When any video, any audio clip can be convincingly faked, we lose our most basic fundamental anchor to what is real. So how does this all fit together? Well, the scary part is that these two things, the weak institutions and the powerful technology, they aren't just coexisting. They're locked in a dangerous, mutually reinforcing spiral. Each one makes the other worse. Here's how that feedback loop works. Step 1, the institutional decay creates that societal immune deficiency we talked about. Step 2, generative AI comes along and introduces the infection, the never-ending stream of disinformation. Step 3, that infection exploits our weakness, which further erodes trust in the very institutions that are supposed to help us. Think about it. A government's denial of a deepfake just becomes more proof of the conspiracy for those who already believe it. And this spiral leads to a very dark place. It's a state called information nihilism. This is the point where citizens, just exhausted and overwhelmed by it all, basically give up on the idea of truth itself. They conclude that everyone is lying all the time, and the only rational choice left is to just align with your tribe, your team. And for a democracy, that is absolutely catastrophic. So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. We can't solve this problem by just playing technological whack-a-mole, trying to debunk every fake that pops up. The crisis is structural. At its core, it's about a societal immune system that is failing, and the only lasting solution is to treat that underlying condition. And that leaves us with the central, maybe the most important question of our time. In an age of AI fakes, deep distrust, and crumbling institutions, the challenge isn't just about fighting lies anymore. It's about the monumental, almost overwhelming task of rebuilding a shared reality. And that's a question we all need to start thinking about.